Dave Chappelle recently did a stand-up performance that has been getting a lot of views. The last time I checked, the video had over 17 million views, so it's gotten, you know, a lot of viral attention. And the video is over 20 minutes long. I watched the whole thing. And, you know, for most of the video, Dave Chappelle is going on with the typical narrative about how cops are hunting down African Americans as though, you know, they're just killing black men for no reason, out of nowhere. It's just, they just want to hunt down black folk, you know, out of nowhere, no reason whatsoever. So he's going on with this typical narrative, right? Racism and all that stuff. But then at the end of the video, he says something that really grabbed my attention, because everything he said until the very end was rhetoric that I've been hearing for years, right? They're just hunting down black folk. But at the end of the video, he says something that when I heard it, I had to rewind it and listen to it. In fact, I've heard it several times. And he says something that is really, I mean, it's a call to arms, essentially. And I had to come to the conclusion that at the end of the video, Dave Chappelle is calling for violence. He's calling for violence. Essentially, he's calling for a race war, because his whole narrative is that there is this tension between blacks and whites. And in the end of the video, he says that this is the last stronghold for civil discourse. But after this, it's just rat-a-tat-tat-tat-tat, and that's basically vulgar street speak for there's going to be guns, and we're going to go guns blazing. That's essentially what that means. Rat-a-tat-tat-tat-tat-tat-tat. And, you know, he talks about how, you know, oh, there's all this tension between cops and blacks, and they're just shooting black people, blah, blah, blah. Shooting blacks, you know, with no provocation whatsoever, no context whatsoever. They're just shooting blacks. This is, you know, we're living in genocide right now. And he just uses this narrative to justify race war. Congratulations, Dave Chappelle. You just gave another argument for the race realists and for all of the lunatic, fanatic right-wingers who are just fantasizing about the day that a race war is going to occur. You know, there are people on the internet, a lot of people, who talk about race war, and they even have an acronym for it. I forgot what it is. It's like Rohanda or something like that. Wakanda, I don't know. But they fantasize about, you know, a race war, and they love to read this book. It's called The Land of the Saints or something. I don't remember, but it was written by some French guy, I think back in the 70s or 80s. And Field of the Saints, I think it's called. But it's about a race war, and there's a lot of fantasy in it. But people read books about, you know, the coming race war, and they're waiting for this moment. And so here you have a very famous comedian who does a stand-up performance. The video goes viral. It's getting millions upon millions of views. It's probably going to end up being in the tens of millions. And in the end of this video, he's like, hey, in the end, we gonna come guns blazing, rat-a-tat, rat-tat-tat-tat. You just helped fulfill that racist narrative. And that's the thing. That's the thing. There are several things that I want to talk about in this video, so this is probably going to be a long one. The Black Lives Matter crowd, the BLM crowd, the, you know, Black Power crowd, the F the Police crowd, the ACAB crowd, all these people talk about how they want to fight police brutality. And their whole cause is about how we need to just rid ourselves of police brutality, and the police are evil, and the institution of the police is evil. We need to just purge all of it out of our society. What they don't understand, or at least what they don't care to understand, or maybe they know this reality and they just don't care. They just want to see the world burn. But what they never mention is how if they continue on this route, and they continue on supporting rioting, supporting looting, supporting the rioters, supporting violence, what will eventually happen is you will have more police brutality. What they are pushing for would eventually lead to the facilitating of more police brutality. because you have more violence, you have more hatred towards cops, you have more destruction of property, like what happened at the Wendy's. You have more looting, more killing, more, killing of cops, killing of civilians. And if this thing escalates to the point where it becomes a national emergency, eventually, in the midst of all of that, cops are going to either resign, cops are going to want to leave the inner cities, cops are going to want to leave cities, metropolitan centers, or they're going to withdraw cops from certain areas, and crime will go up. This is what happened in Ferguson. Crime will go up, and the looting will continue. And enough Americans are going to say, well, send in the military. Send in the military. I want to see the National Guard. At least I feel safe. And I would rather have cops on the streets than the military. Because with the military, it's like you're living under a military occupation. That's what it would be. And it would be scary. It would be very scary. And at that point, you would then be living under a police state. You would then be living, well, not really a police state. Well, yeah, you could say it's a police state. You could then say you're living under a militarist government. And then you would have problems. You would have more police brutality because authorities would have to become more brutal in order to squash violence. Authorities would also become more paranoid because let's not forget, and people never mention this, well, the BLM types never really mention this, cops are humans. Cops are humans, and cops have wives and children. A police officer has a wife and kids to go, back home to see. He wants to see his wife and kids. And so if he tells you to put your hands on the steering wheel and you put your hands on your pocket or anywhere near your pockets, he's going to automatically think that you're going to have a gun, or, he's going to be worried that you're going to pull out a gun, and he's not going to find out if you have a gun or not. He's just going to shoot you because he has a wife and kids and he wants to see his family. So cops, authorities are going to become more paranoid. And, when you have local police officers, local cops know the locals and they tend to get along. They generally get along. If you have soldiers from different states going to areas of the country that they're not familiar with, they're not going to know the locals. It's almost like you're living, in military occupied Iraq. It's like a bunch of soldiers walking around. It's scary. You'll be walking to a bowling alley or to the 7-Eleven or to the grocery store or wherever, a gas station, and you have a soldier with assault rifle just walking around. It's not going to be America. It's not going to be the America that you know. It's going to be a different place. And these people who are like, we just want to stop police brutality, but then they support looting and rioting and anarchy, well, what you're doing is actually facilitating the transition towards a police state. So what you claim to be against, you're actually supporting. What you claim to be against, you are actually manifesting. So what these people are doing is facilitating the transition to a militarist state. And, it'll be more tyrannical and it'll be more militaristic than what we have now. So that's one thing. And then the other thing I want to say is I want to address the very common opinion that I hear from people when they say, why are comedians becoming political? Like Dave Chappelle, right? And people always say this when the comedian is bashing their guy. Because if the comedian is praising their favorite politician, then they love this comedian, and look, the left hates him because he's not politically correct, or hey, the right hates this comedian because he bashes pro-lifers or something like that. Like when people get mad about comedians becoming political, it's always because that comedian is mocking something that they find important. Just thought I would mention that in passing. But here's the thing, why do comedians become political? Why do they get political? Comedians become political because comedy by its very nature is political. Comedy by its very nature is political. I've never really heard anyone elucidate this reality clearly, but I'm going to do so in this video. Comedy is political by its very nature. If comedy was all about just saying jokes, right, just saying mere jokes, then comedians would be on the stage saying like knock knock jokes and why did the chicken cross the road and all that. But that's not what comedians do. Comedians mock and make fun of politicians. They make fun of religion. They make fun of certain political disasters and occurrences. because it's political. And by making jokes about political things or political people, politicians, or religion or ideologies, they then, they make people laugh. And by making people laugh, they influence them. If you make somebody laugh, you have power over them. To a certain extent, you have power over them. It's just like if you make somebody mad, you, to a certain extent, have some power over them. If you make someone laugh, you have some power over them. And that power is influence. You have some sort of influence over those people. So if you mock a politician and everyone's laughing, you've influenced them. Because now those people are going to go to their friends and be like, oh yeah, George Bush is, a retard or whatever. Or like Obama, the way he talks, it's so funny. Or like, hey, did you hear what Trump said? And then they're going to give the joke that they heard on Trevor Noah. And because the joke, while it's funny, it has some sort of a political description or a political refutation of whatever Trump said. And so comedy is a medium by which to spread and convey political ideas. The most, to me, the two, from my own observation, the two most powerful means of influence are comedy and music. Those two things. Comedy and music are the two most powerful and most effective mediums by which to influence people and by which to convey certain ideological and political messages. Why do you think we are hearing so many people say things like, well, now I get most of my political commentary by watching Trevor Noah, Dave Chappelle, Bill Maher, Stephen Colbert, Conan O'Brien. Why do you, Jon Stewart? These are comedians, but they have now become political commentators. They're political commentators. And they use comedy as a way to communicate political ideas. There was a book I remember reading years ago. I forgot what the title was, but it was an anti-Enlightenment book, counter-Enlightenment book from the I think it was from the 17th century, and it talked about one of the strategies of the Enlightenment philosophers. The Enlightenment was all about bashing Christianity. People say it was all about making man realize that he innately has knowledge about human existence and morality and all that, but ultimately the Enlightenment was about, we hate religion. That's ultimately what it was about. Unless you're a deist or a Muslim, we hate Christianity. And one of the strategies of the Enlightenment philosophers was humor, was to use humor. That's why, you read, for example, Voltaire. Voltaire is filled with humor when he writes. He's full of jokes and, basically smart aleck comments, mocking and rhetorical statements and things like that. Because one of the strategies of the Enlightenment was to use humor. And one of the ideas of the Enlightenment was that if you can get someone to laugh at something, then that for one thing, it reveals their own beliefs. But what they would teach is if you laugh at something, that means your mind innately rejects it. Because one of the things that the Enlightenment taught was that mankind innately knows about morality. It doesn't need religion to understand moral principles. And so what the Enlightenment taught was, if I told you that Christ died and rose after 3 days and he resurrected, and you laugh at that, that proves that your mind knows that that's ridiculous. But they would not present Christian stories from the New Testament in a serious way. They would present Christian beliefs in a mocking way to get you to laugh, to get that knee-jerk laugh reaction. Then they would argue and say, well, you laughed at it. That's a reflection of your own intellect saying that what you're hearing is ridiculous. And so if you could mock Christian principle and get people to laugh at that, then that was a way of getting people to reject it. And it was getting people, it was trying to convince people that their own minds rejected Christianity. And so this was one of the strategies. It was to use humor, because humor ultimately is a form of power. And so if you can laugh at something, then that is a reflection of, it's a way to get people to belittle it, to see it as nothing, to see it in a nonchalant manner, and to ultimately reject it. in fact, the term comedy comes from ancient Greece, but in what historical context did it stem from? It stemmed from ancient Athens, where comedians would make fun of politicians. So, by its very nature, comedy is political, stemming all the way back from its own ancient origins. Comedy is political. It's a political tool. So when people say, "Oh, it was just a joke," that's just a manipulative way to cover up the fact that they're using jokes as a way to spread certain ideas and certain feelings. So yeah, it's very, very subtle how this form of deception works. But there's also a very spiritual aspect to this. St. Augustine talks about this, and I think Augustine was the first theologian to make this observation about mocking and laughter in the context of the suffering of Christ. Christ never laughs. He never laughs. And I think that is a reflection of the reality of how joking can be a way of manipulation and power, and Christ eschewed himself from that. And when Christ was on the cross, people mocked him. People made fun of him. And it was a way, when they were saying like, "Oh, if he's really the Son of God, then he can take himself down from that cross." And it was a way of using humor as a way, it was a way of using humor to belittle him and to make it out that he isn't the Messiah. And when Noah, after the flood, got drunk, and ultimately when he got naked, Ham, one of his sons, mocked him, laughed at him. And St. Augustine says that Noah was suffering and he was naked, and Ham mocked him when he was suffering and naked. Ham mocked him. And Christ was suffering the cup of his suffering. Remember what Christ said in the Last Supper. He takes the cup of wine and he takes the chalice of wine and he says, "This is my blood. This is the cup of my suffering." So when Christ was enduring the cup of his suffering, when he was enduring that chalice of suffering, by which his blood, which he uses, wine to represent his suffering, people mocked him, just like Ham mocked Noah when he was naked. And so you see in this parallel the use of comedy to mock. You see in this parallel the use of humor as a way to belittle people and to really almost justify evil. "Oh, we're just saying a joke. Oh, we were mocking him." It's a way not just to justify evil, but it's a way to convey an evil way of thinking. And so when people say, "Oh, why are comedians getting into politics?" It's because comedy by its very nature is political. And so when Dave Chappelle is going on about, well, yeah, this is the last place for civil discourse, but after this, it's going to be guns blazing, he's using his platform as a comedian to convey a message of violence and destruction. They mocked Christ, and today they are mocking Christ. If they can mock Christ, they can mock anything, even the suffering of innocent people. And they will even justify persecuting people by pointing to their own delusional, way of thinking. Cops are evil, or, cops have shot black men, therefore all cops are evil. And if you support the cops, you need to be killed. It's like we're going back to the mentality of the Spanish Civil War. Oh, if you support Franco, then you're an evil tyrant, die. Or you support the monarchy, you're an evil despot, fascist, whatever, die. That's what we're returning to. And so people want to see the world burn, and they are going to try to bring the world to flames. And as people are suffering, they're going to be laughing. Anyway, thought I would give you guys my thoughts on this. Hope you guys have learned something from this message. You guys just heard some theology. God bless.